Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Once again, today we have another video, as you saw in the title. And it's a very long case that I'm going to name as Mary Stauffer's. Now, I want you to remember that name perfectly. I want you to remember Mary, because it's going to be very important around the story. Regarding things that happened before the events, just that, remember the name. I really have nothing more to say. I already told you in the previous case that is above that I will be doing the Fernanda Maciel case, because it is something very recent and something that many people asked me for. Wait for it on Wednesday, hopefully. If not, it will be on Friday. A lot of information is coming out and I must do it right. Without further ado, here are my social networks. Let's start with the case. Mary was born in Duluth, Minnesota, 240 kilometers north of Arden Hills, on June 20th, 1943. At 16 years old, she was a volunteer in her hometown from the Baptist Church. That's when she met Irving Stauffer, who was 19 years old at the time. Irving was also from Duluth. And after graduating from high school, she went to Bethel University, where she earned degrees in mathematics and physics. Mary and Irving started dating in 1961. She finished high school to move to Arden Hill and go to Bethel University, graduating in 1965, with a degree also in mathematics and music. Sometime later, they got married. Irving attended a seminary school where they teach theology and other subjects related to Catholicism. Meanwhile, Mary taught math and algebra at Alexander Ramsey High School in Roseville, near the same university. In 1968, both traveled to Cebu in the Philippines for a student project. In this place, Irving taught at the Baptist Theology University. They stayed a few months until they returned to Bethel, where Irving ended up graduating in 1970 from the seminary he was attending. In September of the same year, they moved to Polk, a small town in Nebraska, and Irving became the pastor of the First Baptist Church. They stayed there for a long time until Mary gave birth to a girl. This girl would be named Elizabeth, or nicknamed Beth. In May of 1975, Irving was given a higher position in the church, so he has to go back to the Philippines along with his family. During this trip is when they have their second child, whom they would name Stephen. When they returned to Bethel University, they moved into some apartments on campus. Their stay was supposed to last a year, as they had to return to the Philippines on May 21st, 1980. A week before departing, they were almost fully prepared with only minor tasks remaining. Among those little things, they had to take Beth to the hairdresser, which Mary would do on May 16th. So this, in particular, is the day of the events, and the protagonists of this case are Mary and Beth. These are the two people we are going to be following. And luckily, we have a lot of information about what they were doing, what they were thinking, and everything that happened. Let's then move on to the facts. May 16th, 1980, at 3:45 in the afternoon. Mary and Beth got into the family car to go to Carmen's Beauty Salon in Roseville, just 5 minutes away. They left the car in the adjacent parking lot and entered the salon. At 4:30 p.m., they had already finished and were heading towards the car. As Beth approached the door, a man suddenly grabbed her and pointed a gun directly at her head. Looking at Mary, this man says, "I need a ride." Mary then opens the door for her daughter, taking care not to make any sudden movements. Once inside, the man continued to point at Mary, while telling her that she had to take the Interstate 35. Mary Christian, believing the man could be fleeing trouble, told him they were Christians and could assist him. The man told her more than once to shut up. Meanwhile, Beth was completely terrified, and Mary could only tell her, "Beth, God is with us, everything will be okay." At one point on the road, they approached a police car. The stranger didn't hesitate to say, "If you stop the car, I'll shoot both of you in the head." Mary then continues driving on some lonely highways until she reaches a deserted area with trees. The man then forced Mary to turn off the car and both of them to get out. He took out tape and a rope from his jacket, tied them up and put them in the trunk of the car. It's then that the man gets in and the car starts moving. And as they went, until he stopped, Mary and Beth spent the time praying. Although the reason why the car stopped is actually because the man had gotten tired of hearing them pray. So he stopped, opened the trunk, and taped their mouths shut. Although with Beth, he didn't just tape her mouth, but her entire head. Mary says in an interview the following, "We drove for a long time. sometimes on paved roads, sometimes on dusty, unpaved roads. The car often bottomed out, and we noticed it had a full tank of gas. I was afraid the tank could break and the car could explode into flames. Dust was flying inside, and it was hard for us to breathe. He kept stopping the car to check on us, and then closed the trunk. Beth was able to loosen the ropes on her hands, and we were both sweating so much that the adhesive on the tape covering our mouths loosened. We were able to move our lower jaws and speak. I told Beth to try and untie the ropes on my hand. He stopped the car, and I heard voices, mostly from children. We later found out that he had stopped the car at Hazelnut Park in Arden Hills. When he opened the trunk that time, he got furious when he saw that Beth had untied her ropes and had been working to untie mine. He yelled, "Look what you've done!" Then he put the spare tire on top of us so we couldn't make any more attempts to free ourselves. At that moment, a little boy approached the car and saw us tied up in the trunk. He looked at our kidnapper and said, "Hello, what?" Before he could finish, the little boy was thrown into the car with us and the trunk slammed shut. He then jumped back into the driver's seat and drove away. Mary, noticing another child involved, decided to stay calm and keep the child calm, so she introduced herself. She told him her name, and the child responded that his name was Jason and that he was 6 years old. She told them that she was going to visit her grandmother, and Beth responded that she would also see her soon. While they were trying to talk, Mary could feel the change in route. They went from pavement to dust quickly. The car stopped all of a sudden. The man got out and opened the trunk to get Jason out. He closed it immediately. Mary and Beth started praying, hoping, please, that nothing would happen to Jason. However, the car suddenly started moving with no traces of the child. The full identity was discovered later. He is Jason Wilkman, so now I'm gonna tell you more from Jason's perspective and what happened on his side. That same day, when Mary and Beth were kidnapped, Jason went with his mother, Sandra Wilkman, to visit Isabel Brains and her son Timothy. While Sandra and Isabel were in the kitchen, the children shouted from another room that they were going to play at Hazelnut Park, literally behind Timothy's house. At 6:30 p.m., a car stopped on the street next to the park, drawing the children's attention as this was an unusual occurrence. Cars didn't easily enter that area. Both boys went towards this vehicle. The only difference is the way they approached. Jason went to the back and Timothy stayed at the front. Jason then could see what was happening in the trunk, and Timothy could see the whole kidnapping. And while he watched as this man grabbed his friend and also put him in the trunk, she decided to run as fast as she could back to the house. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her to her mother, and there she began to cry. After crying inconsolably for a while, she was finally able to say that a man in a car had kidnapped Jason. At 6:37 post-meridian, Isabel contacted the police, and 3 minutes later the officers finally arrived. They didn't know if the kidnapper was still in the area, so they decided to close all the entrances to the park. Once they had covered all this ground, they could start asking the people who were there what had happened. Thanks to the children who were at the scene, they were able to rescue a few details. Like, for example, that this car was a green Ford, with the top part in green vinyl. They also talked about a small sanded spot on the driver's door. In turn, they also noted the detail that the driver was slightly dark-skinned, with black hair and large sunglasses. They also observed he wore a brown jacket. So, after this, the officers also asked the children if they saw where the car had gone. They all pointed in the same direction, and the police went straight there. At 7 and 5 post-meridian de Casillas, the Minnesota police notified those in Anoka, Hennepin, Ramsey, and Washington to be on alert, along with details about the car, child, and driver. At that moment, most of the parents became alarmed. The truth is that it was strange in this park. These things never happened. The park was surrounded by houses. All the families normally trusted that their children went there and came back, so they were terrified. And those parents who were not comforting their children or worrying about seeing that they were okay, they decided to go look for Jason in the park, to see if he was still there, to see if the driver had left him somewhere. On the other hand, while this search was being carried out, a long time had already passed since Mary and Beth had gone to the hairdressers, and the father of the family, Irving, was already starting to worry too much. They had left at 4 p.m., and by 6 they still hadn't returned. On the other hand, Mary's sister was waiting for her to have dinner, and her sister had never done such a thing as not to notify her that she wouldn't go or that she was even going to be late. Both started calling friends and family to see if anyone knew anything, but that was not the case. At 7:30 post-meridium then, Irving calls the police and informs them that his wife and daughter were missing. The person on the other end of the phone, however, tells him that they couldn't do anything and that they believe she would return. All of this, imagine, was happening at the same time as the search for Jason, so obviously there were fewer police to count on. He tells this person that hours had already passed, that he had gone to look for them at the salon, that he had driven all the way, and that he hadn't found them anywhere. However, this person still told him that they couldn't do anything. At 9:30 p.m., then 2 hours later, Irving calls again. The same person answers and tells him exactly the same thing, that the girls hadn't returned. He also said that in the last 10 days, there had been 2 attempted burglaries at the house. Despite the fact that on the second attempt, Mary saw a man at the window, this person on the phone still thought it was nothing serious. At 10:45 p.m., then after ending the previous call, he tried again once more. This time, she wanted a police officer to come to her house to report the disappearance. After hanging up, she told the person next to her who was also taking calls the curious thing about the situation. And this second person then says out loud, let's say, that Beetle was very close to the park where Jason had been kidnapped. They looked at each other for a moment and immediately called the police. The investigators thought that the 2 cases might be connected and sent 2 officers to Irving's house to find out everything they could. After all, the hair salon was near Hazelnut Park. Almost immediately, the officers got a full description of Mary's car, a green Ford, along with the license plate. Mention was also made of a vinyl roof and a sanded spot. Both policemen were surprised. The officers asked for pictures of both. And before they left, they asked Irving if he knew the Wilkmans or their son Jason. He thought about it for a while but said no. The policemen then left promising updates. Almost falling asleep in front of the television that night, Irving understood, upon hearing the word kidnapping on the news, what was going on, and why had the officers asked him about Jason. The following morning, the police officers met at 8 in the morning. All this in order to continue working deeply, even though the situation was much worse than expected. The police chief connected with the Federal Bureau of Investigation through a direct line. He had to notify that all this was a kidnapping, which could include a 6-year-old boy, a girl, and their mother. Returning to Mary and Beth at 9:45 post-meridium, both were under even greater stress than before. Beth crying terribly because they had taken Jason without a word, and Mary stressed because she had to calm her own daughter in a situation she couldn't control. The car had already stopped, and they had been several minutes without hearing anything. Mary began to believe that they were going to leave them there forever, that they were going to leave them without food and without oxygen. Until out of nowhere the trunk opened, the kidnapper took them and covered their eyes with a blindfold. All this to be able to move them to a larger van. Inside, he covered them with boxes and told them not to make a sound. The man closed the door behind him, even with the girls begging, if only, to be able to go to the bathroom. He started driving again until he stopped a few minutes later. The kidnapper then suddenly opened the door once more and let them go to a public restroom. But they were not to make a sound. First, he took Mary, who did her business as best she could. And while he was cleaning, while he was giving her paper to do it, he could see her face for the first time. She had Asian features and large sunglasses. He asked her then who she was or what she wanted, but this person said nothing. By the time they got back to the van, Beth had already soiled herself, so the kidnapper gave her a new box and they continued on their way. They started to go through city traffic, or so it seemed from what Mary could make out, at 11:55 p.m. They stopped. The man first took out Beth with her eyes covered and led her by the shoulders into the house and into a closet. There he left her locked up and told her he would return with her mother, so he did the same with Mary. She was blindfolded and he led her by the shoulders among Beth's screams and the confusion of the whole moment. She thought for a second that this person had addressed her as Mrs. Stauffer, that is, he had referred to her by her last name. However, she thought she had heard wrong. Maybe she was just imagining it. The man kept pushing her while Mary was pleading with him to let them go, to leave them alone, and Beth was screaming. The kidnapper simply pushed her and said, "Just get in, Mary." Now there was no doubt this man knew her. From somewhere he knew who she was. Mary kept asking herself from the closet, who was this person? What did he want with her? Had she ever crossed paths with him? Did they know each other from somewhere? She really didn't know. But I can answer those questions for you right now. I can give you some background on who this person was, so you can better understand why Mary and Beth ended up in this situation. Who was this unknown man who suddenly took her away, and why did he know Mary? The person behind the kidnapping was Ming Shenshu, 29 years old, born in Taiwan in 1950. His father was the creator of a continuous forest inventory system. That is, he had conceptualized a method for monitoring forests that is still in use today. And his mother, on the other hand, was a mathematics graduate. His parents had planned in Taiwan not to have more children until they had the opportunity to move to the United States, if that ever happened. The opportunity finally came in 1957, thanks to the University of Minnesota. They didn't think twice, they traveled to the United States and moved to Roseville, where they bought a house. This was, as I already said, Minnesota, for the university they attended, and they settled in this place. It's here when they have 2 more children. Here's where the problems start for Ming. He, from all of this, had started to feel jealous because his brothers had Western names and not Eastern ones like his. This did not help at all with what happened afterwards. At 9 years old, Ming had to take care of the household, or rather, his father died of cancer and put him in charge. However, let's not forget that he was 9 years old and obviously couldn't do much at that very moment. Although the reality is that Ming took it in a completely different way than anyone else. He, from this new title he had received from his father, began to force his brothers to do things they didn't want to do. He made his brothers wait for him at the door when he came home from school, take his books, cook for him, feed him. And if they didn't do that, Ming would hit them. This abuse lasted for years until one of his brothers said he wouldn't tolerate it anymore. Another episode, so to speak, was when he was 14 years old, as I said, Ming. Even so, he had to take care of the house somehow and started delivering newspapers. One day he went to one of these buildings where he had to deliver, and mysteriously, one of the apartments caught fire. Almost immediately, Ming was arrested and obviously questioned about it. He said he couldn't control himself, that there was something inside him that forced him to do things. From this, he went to a juvenile court and the judge granted him probation, on the condition that he go to therapy and undergo psychiatric tests. During one of these tests then, it was discovered that he indeed needed psychiatric help. So, almost immediately he was placed in an institution so they could treat him and help him. Unfortunately, he only stayed a few weeks. After leaving this place, he returned to Alexander Ramsey High School. And at 15 years old, he met an algebra teacher who would mark him for life. Mary Stauffer, see? Why did I tell you to remember the name? Does it have to do with this man's past? Ming became obsessed with this teacher. Despite this, she kept her distance, and a year later, she started getting A's in all subjects. It was an outstanding average, and, in fact, in the last year, before graduating, she was voted most likely to succeed by the rest of her classmates. This is how she gets to the University of Minnesota, although after failing her first exam, she decides to drop the subject and later drop out of the university altogether. With the help of her mother, she set up an electronics repair shop, as that's what she liked and found easy. Her mother remarried in 1972 and moved to Alexandria, Virginia, leaving the house where they had grown up in Ming's hands. Over time, she hired staff to help her in the shop. However, these people really had no connection to Ming. They hadn't been able to, in all the years they worked for him, really establish a connection. Ming only talked about work. She was present at every repair. She was present at every sale, but that's all she did. She didn't talk about relationships. She didn't talk about having friends. She didn't talk about hobbies, about absolutely nothing. So they never really got to know her. And obviously, one of those things they didn't know was Ming's obsession with Mary Stauffer. The moment he leaves college, he starts writing somewhat novels. Intense. These novels were about him and an older woman whom her husband couldn't satisfy, so Ming did it for them. At the end of each of these stories, the older woman in question would end up with him, and that apparently was his personal fantasy. Obviously, that woman was Mary. And really, little by little, the stories were falling short and no longer seemed enough to him. It is then that he begins to follow her, begins to do everything she does. He begins to follow her everywhere, to follow every move. He went to the supermarket with her, went to church, listened to her husband speak in church, did absolutely everything she did. And so he stayed until March of 1980, when Mary's husband was speaking in church. At one point, he announced that they would go with his family for 4 years to the Philippines, which Ming took as a very clear sign that the time had come. So she immediately began her plan to take Mary with her. According to him, on the day of the kidnapping, nothing could stop him. He went straight to the hair salon and followed Beth and Mary. That's how the events take place. Returning to the facts as such. The day after the kidnapping, Ming takes the girls out of the closet, takes them down to the kitchen, gives them breakfast. And meanwhile, Mary keeps insisting that at least let her call her husband. However, Ming really doesn't pay attention to these comments, so he takes them back to the closet after breakfast. A few moments later, he takes Mary out of the closet again, leaving Beth inside. He takes her to the living room and ties her to the armchair. From there, he set up a camera that looked directly at the woman. Once set up, Ming started a conversation that would last 3 hours. In it, he explained to Mary all the bad things that had happened to him in life. That after getting a bad grade, he was denied a scholarship. And that's why he had to be sent to Vietnam to fight, and that bad grade he had been given was from Mary. All of this, however, was a clear fabrication by Ming. None of that had happened, he simply wanted to make her feel guilty. Ming asked her if she remembered him, and she replied that she simply remembered those who were disruptive in class. Because they made her job more difficult, that is, they made her have a hard time. So Ming got angry and asked her if what he had to do for her to remember him was to give her a hard time. Ming specifically emphasized one moment. One day, when he greeted her in the hallway and she greeted him back, but didn't stop to talk to him. This broke his heart. Apparently, Mary tried to apologize to him, telling him that she hadn't noticed him or that she had so many things on her mind that she really hadn't ignored him. On purpose? Meanwhile, Beth's screams were getting louder and louder, so Mary asked her please to let her go see her daughter. Ming had an almost immediate change of attitude and untied her and took her to the closet along with Beth. The girl told him that she urgently needed to go to the bathroom and Ming allowed it. Once this was done, he took her back to the couch where he explained the 2 times he had tried to enter the house. That is, this person that Mary had seen in the window was Ming? Mary asked him how he had found her, and he explained that. The Roseville Journal revealed that she and her family had returned from the Philippines, and that from there he followed her home. He also told her that he would let her make the flight to the Philippines, but that he first had to get even with her for leaving. By getting even, Ming meant to abuse her. He explained that he could do things forcefully or he could go about it calmly. Mary told him that she would rather he not abuse her at all, but Ming said no, and he did it. He also told her at the end that those minutes were not enough, that all those years of suffering he went through would not be healed in such a short time. He also explained to her why he was recording everything. Firstly, it was supposedly so that he would not have to enjoy her again if he got angry after releasing her. And secondly, because maybe that way Mary wouldn't say anything, nothing at all. That is, he thought that maybe she would be too scared to reveal this to the circle of Christians she had around her, because of what they might say. Soon, the media, and specifically the local newspaper, had the news of Mary and her daughter's disappearance, which caused Ming to panic. It made Mary write a letter to her husband saying she needed time, but that she would return with Beth. The day they had to take the plane to the Philippines. On May 20th, Irving received the letter and found the story strange. He gave everything to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for further investigation. The letter had been sent from a post office in Minneapolis, but there was no more information. May 21st, 1980, was the day Ming had promised to take them home. And Mary was very alert that morning, as she hoped it would be true. She heard Ming get up and walk towards the closet thinking it would finally happen, but no, Ming. He kept going, and the back door of the house was heard opening and closing, followed by the sound of a car starting and leaving. Mary then knew that he would not keep his promise, and, although she was tremendously angry, she decided to calm down for her daughter. That day, all they did was pray. Soon a routine was established in the house. Mary asked Mink for more sustainable food for Beth's growth, and he complied. He also chained them and took them to the kitchen as Mary had offered to cook. The curtains of the house were always closed, and they were always watched. The girls took on a survival attitude. They just wanted to get out of that place alive. Meanwhile, Mink said he wouldn't hurt Beth if they didn't cause any trouble. Meg began to suffer a lot. She had anxiety every night, to the point where she was pulling out chunks of hair. Despite all the suffering and getting used to the situation, Mary never forgot that she had to escape. She soon discovered that there was someone else in the house. In the kitchen, it could be seen that someone else was using it, and she thought several times about leaving him a note, but she knew that Ming would not allow that kind of behavior. Mary then confirmed that there was someone else when she heard footsteps under her wardrobe, that is, they came from the basement. She tried to call for help by kicking the floor, but no one came to look for her. The person living in the basement was Ming's brother, Ron. He lived there while attending university. One day, Ming told him that she would close all the rooms in the house so he couldn't get through. And although it was a bit strange, Ron didn't mind, since he didn't use them. What he did find strange was that the kitchen was too clean, which was unlike Ming. So he thought maybe he had gotten a girlfriend and that's why he wanted more privacy, but he didn't understand. Still, who could be dating someone like his brother? Inside the closet where they lived, there was only a small pillow, a thin blanket, and a bucket, along with a larger blanket in a plastic bag. When Mary started investigating the bag, inside she found a paper with the house address, which she memorized down to the last detail. She had Beth do the same. Later, she tore up the paper to prevent Ming from discovering it. Ming promised several times to let them go, but each time he delayed the dates more and more. Over time, they were losing hope that he could let them go. That's why Mary insisted that they had to memorize the place and the kidnapper's name to have a chance. However, their hopes completely collapsed. When Ming confessed to them that he would never let them go, Ming continued with the abuses, hoping that somehow it would happen, like in his novels, that Mary would fall in love with him and leave her husband. Of course, this never happened, nor would it ever. That was the main problem for Ming, that Mary kept refusing to love him. This made him furious. That's how one day, when he had her thrown on the bed trying to touch her, he saw that Mary didn't respond. She was still. Then he asked her, "Have you ever seen someone suffocate?" He got up from the bed and said, "You're going to have to watch your daughter suffocate if you don't respond." Mary replied that she believed in the teachings of the Bible and in being faithful to her husband, that it didn't feel right to do what he was asking. Ming got angry at the response and ran out of the room. Mary tried to run to the door to close it and not let him in, but Ming was stronger than her. He brought a plastic bag, opened the wardrobe, and looked at Beth. He asked, "Do you like to play with plastic bags?" Beth told him that she had never played with a bag, and Ming replied that he would put it over her head. Before he could continue, Mary had to come over and kiss him to make him stop. Ming told Beth that she would spend the night alone, as Mary would have to pay for trying to leave him. Outside the room, Ming covered Mary's eyes and led her to the living room. Ming. He had noticed that the letter he had made Mary write was not making the news, and the case was still being treated as a kidnapping. Not like the family dispute that he wanted. So on June 3rd, he had Mary write again, this time saying that the story was not as it was being portrayed in the news, that she just wanted to be alone, and that there was no kidnapping. The process then would be that Ming would check that everything was okay, that there was no secret message, and he would have Mary put the letter in the envelope. Irving received this letter and immediately gave it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who, like last time, did not reveal it and only passed it among a few selected agents, without saying too much. On June 8th at 9 p.m., Ming took Beth and Mary to the kitchen to tell them that he would have to go on a business trip to Chicago the following week, and he wanted them to go with him. Ming had previously tried to win Beth over by playing board games with her, buying her the latest video games, and finally asking her if she thought a vacation would be fun, to which she said yes. On the other hand, Mary told her it would be much more fun if they left them on the Bethel University campus, in her apartment. A comment that was completely ignored. Ming wanted to go to Chicago for a job fair to try to get hired in a bigger city. She felt that if she were to release them and they went to the police, it would be easier to hide in that kind of environment. She also told them that she had been in a library researching and that she would not make the same mistakes as other kidnappers. Based on the fact that by passing Chicago, she would be crossing a state line, and that would add charges, like what had happened to other people. So, on June 9th, Mink equipped the motorhome. That same day in the afternoon, he practiced in the closet how he would roast her in the van, and at night, he blindfolded them. He put a jacket over their heads and took them to the recreational vehicle that is, the motorhome. Inside, he covered them in boxes. After a while, he let them roam free in the recreational vehicle but without looking out the windows. When they finally stopped, Mink said he would rest for a while. He closed everything and went to sleep. At that moment, Mary managed to look out the window and recognized that she was in Wisconsin. Mink only slept for 3 hours, during which he seemed to remain alert, so they couldn't try anything. When he woke up, he told them they were going to buy new clothes. They hadn't changed since the day of the kidnapping, but he didn't care much about that. He rather believed they would be less recognizable in different clothes. Mink said that Mary would go with him to the shopping mall, so they drove there, left Beth chained inside, and went to Sears. At that moment, Mary wanted to catch the attention of the person who was serving them, but she didn't know if the news of the kidnapping had reached Wisconsin. Similarly, she was scared that someone would notice and Mink would run to the van. With Beth, Mary couldn't do anything. They stayed a total of 5 days in Chicago, always chained or threatened by Ming. On the last day, he allowed Mary to call her husband to find out if he had already moved, since the lease of the apartment was expiring and they had to go on a trip to the Philippines. So Mary called from a public phone to the church office while Ming listened to everything next to her. The call went to an executive named Paul, who Mary knew, and while she was asking his name, Ming got distracted because they started yelling at her from the street to run to the trailer they had parked there to make that call. In the midst of the shouting, she secretly told Paul, "Paul, it's me, Mary." Unfortunately, Paul didn't manage to hear. Although Mary managed to ask for Irving's personal number, Ming wrote it down and they left quickly so as not to attract more attention. By this time, Irving's phone lines had been tapped by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in case Mary or Beth called. This happened on June 16th at 10:14 post-meridium. The call went like this. "Hello, Irving, speaking. Hello, Dad. Yes, Betty, are you okay?" "Yes, and Mom?" "Yes, that's good. Me?" "Dad, yes." "Happy Father's Day." A few seconds later, Beth told him they could no longer talk and that she had to go. They said goodbye, unfortunately. For the father, it would be bad news and good news. His daughter was still alive, but he didn't know where. In July, everything changed. Ming told the girls that her brother was living downstairs and that he would be going to study abroad, so they would no longer be in the closet. That's how, over time, both realized that now, being chained outside, they could move more freely, even going outside the room and to the bathroom next door. Unfortunately, on July 7th, Mary told Ming that she could now move better, and Ming didn't like this. So he locked them in another closet and went to work. Although I said, unfortunately, this was one of the best things that happened to them. For a while, that same day, inside the closet, Mary couldn't stop looking at the hinges, until after a while of playing with them, she managed to dislodge them. Then she managed to remove the door. Without the door, the chain couldn't hold up well. Then Mary and Beth managed to remove it. Of course, they still had the cable that was tied around them. However, that didn't give them problems to move. So Beth and Mary managed to get to the phone in the kitchen before they got there. However, Beth started to have a nervous breakdown and yelled at her mother to take her back to the closet, where Beth calmed down. But after yelling for a while, Mary had to explain to her that this was her only chance to escape. And that way, Ming wouldn't be able to hurt them again. Mary then, convincing Beth, grabbed the kitchen phone and dialed the police number she had memorized a few days ago on the back of a patrol car. On one of those occasions when she managed to get out. When someone answered, Mary said, "I'm Mary Stauffer. I think you're looking for me and my daughter Beth. Please come quickly. We're locked in a house. They have loaded guns here. They'll kill us. And anyone who tries to enter, they have many guns. Don't try to come if he's at home." Mary gave the address and the name of the kidnapper, who could return at any moment. They then decided to wait for the police. They then decided to go out the back door and hide behind a car or some bush. They quickly saw a blue car and hid behind it, waiting for the police. What they didn't know was that the police were already there. The officers had already known about all of this from the first minute of the call. They had already been informed, meaning they were already on the scene and had already covered the entire area. They cut off traffic, put the neighbors in their respective homes, and were already looking for them. So 2 police officers saw them, took them in a car, and in the meantime, 2 other police officers stayed at the house waiting for Ming. Obviously, they both didn't feel entirely safe, as they thought that somehow Ming was going to find them, that he was going to take them away again, that they were not safe. However, they were finally okay. Unfortunately, one of the first things one of the 2 policemen asked the girls was if Jason was with them, as they had never found him. Mary was very surprised to hear this, as she thought that maybe the police had already found him. She hadn't seen him since the first day, so she didn't know anything. It was a very regrettable thing to inform Jason's family about what was happening, that he was not with them, and what happened afterwards was regrettable. Actually, the Federal Bureau of Investigation didn't have Jason's location. They didn't know where he was, but they understood that Ming should know. They were going to charge him with first-degree murder if he didn't talk. So they made a deal in which they would give him a second-degree charge. If he revealed Jason's location, Ming agreed and finally told the police where he had left Jason. He was on a reserve 19 miles from Hazelnut Park. This reserve was the Carlos Avery game. According to Ming, he had left him there without doing him any harm. The only problem is that he had left him alone in a reserve, with a lot of trees, a lot of forests, ponds, swamps, bushes, wildlife. Consciously, he had left a child as small as Jason in a place where he would be defenseless. So the 29th of October. They then followed the lead that Ming had given them and found Jason and what was left of him. Something completely regrettable, I have to say. I really feel sorry for that family. And after all that was done to find the girls, hoping that Jason was with them, this was one of the endings. Most unpleasant possible. Some things that happened after all this is that Jason's family made a foundation in his memory called Jason Wilkman Memory Program. And every year, they hold a special event for Jason's birthday. The Federal Bureau of Investigation took the case and went to find Ming. He was arrested at his work in the lower part, and the truth is that he did not resist first of all. But what was done was to ask over and over again what was going on. To make it short, since this video is very long, basically, they went through all possible legal processes with all the evidence they had. They had the house, they had the marks on the girls' bodies from the bindings too, the signs of abuse. They had everything to prove that Ming was guilty and that Mary had nothing to do with it. At first, it was thought that maybe she had tried to be part of all this, that she had tried to fake the kidnapping and everything else, but it was proven that no, she had nothing to do with it anymore. What happened with Ming was basically that on March 2nd, 1981, the judge sentenced him to 40 years in prison plus 30 years for the kidnapping of the girls. These years would be served concurrently, meaning that when the 30 years were up, another 10 would be served. Would he have a chance to appeal for parole? Only in 2010, on March 17th, 1981, was he taken to Borough Prison in Springfield, Missouri for a psychiatric evaluation. In May, he began to show a more aggressive attitude, even trying to escape from the facility and custody. He was then considered a threat to others. He was transferred in September to a maximum security prison in Illinois, and after 2 months he was segregated. Because the prisoners who were with him had heard what he had done and were planning to kill him. So he was transferred from institution to institution. So well, that was the whole video for today. I hope you liked it. At least the investigation is a solved case. We have a somewhat happy ending at least. That is, the family reunited, everyone grew up. Obviously there is psychological treatment after this. It's a mark that probably didn't disappear from their lives. But anyway, they came out alive. They were smart. Mary, specifically, was super smart about it. Fortunately, Beth and Mary were able to keep growing. Obviously, there is a whole process behind. But Beth was able to grow and form her own family. Mary went to the Philippines after all the trials ended and continued working with her husband, Irving. After a long time, they were able to do this interview, which I based most of this story on, to tell you what happened in the case. We have all this perspective from them, with all this information about what happened and this ending, which is finally at least resolved. Fortunately, Mary said in a closing interview that her life and her daughter Beth's life were not defined by this event. That's how they were able to live in peace. And well, that was the whole video for today. I hope you really liked the research. This is a solved case. It's a case that at least has a happy ending as far as one can say. That is, as you heard before, their lives were not defined by this event. Obviously, there's a lot of therapy, a lot they probably had to go through after the fact, because they spent time with this person. Obviously, they still felt threatened even when they were already with the police, so it was definitely something terrible, yet they were able to move forward, so a well-resolved case. Finally, sad for Jason's family. So well, I hope you liked the investigation. In a note, you will have the interviews and most of the sources on which I based, or at least the ones I saved. That's why I said most, because sometimes I don't save some things down, in a virtual notepad. Here on the site are my patrons. Thank you for supporting me. Mostly with the demonetization, you know how this is. The cases are automatically demonetized. They go to review and then they are monetized. We have a somewhat strange relationship with YouTube, so thanks to those who support me on Patreon. Here is my cat in case you wanted to see her. At first, the story was not there because she did not want to participate. I don't know, she didn't feel like it at that moment. She's a star. And well, here you have a new video, here you have a recommended video. You can subscribe by clicking on my face and see you in another video. Goodbye.